Today, I stand before you to explore a chilling yet fascinating chapter of our shared human story, a story of survival, dominance, and the mysterious extinction of our closest relatives, the Neanderthals. The title may sound sensational, Humans that Hunted and Cannibalized Neanderthals, but what lies beneath is not just brutality, it is a tale of competition, evolution, and the primal instincts that shaped who we are today. A clash of species some 50,000 years ago, two types of humans walked the earth. Homo sapiens, us, and Neanderthals, our robust, intelligent cousins. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Asia. But then something changed. Around 40,000 years ago, they vanished. One of the theories, us. Evidence in the bones in archaeological sites across Europe, including in caves in France and Belgium. Scientists have uncovered Neanderthal bones bearing cut marks, slicing, scraping, and fracturing patterns almost identical to those found on butchered animals. Skulls cracked open to access brain matter. Long bones split to extract the nutritious marrow inside. These are not the random results of scavengers, they are the intentional work of tool-using hominins. Very likely early modern humans. Were these acts of war, of hunger, or were they rituals of fear and dominance? Why would humans do this? Let us be clear, this wasn't just simple savagery, it was survival. At a time when food was scarce, climate harsh, and competition intense, Homo sapiens may have viewed Neanderthals not just as rivals, but as resources. Some theories suggest Neanderthals were hunted for their meat, while others argue this cannibalism was symbolic, perhaps a ritual meant to absorb strength, to dominate the spirit of the fallen, or to eliminate a rival species not just physically, but psychologically. Echoes in our DNA, and yet we didn't completely destroy them. Today, almost every non-African human carries Neanderthal DNA. That means at some point there was also interbreeding, not just violence. Love, or at least union, alongside war. Our relationship with Neanderthals was not black and white, it was deeply complex. Lessons from a dark past, so what do we learn from this? We learn that violence and compassion, destruction and cooperation have always walked side by side in human history. We are not monsters, but we are survivors, and survival in the ancient world came at a cost. But perhaps the greatest takeaway is this: the story of Neanderthals is not just their story, it's ours too. We carry their genes, their mysteries, and perhaps their memory. Archaeological and genetic evidence increasingly supports the theory that early modern humans, Homo sapiens, may have hunted and cannibalized Neanderthals during a crucial period of prehistoric contact and competition. This theory, once considered fringe or sensational, has gained legitimacy through a growing body of fossil discoveries, tool, mark analyses, and environmental reconstructions. It paints a grim but fascinating picture of interspecies dynamics in the Pleistocene epoch, a time when survival often demanded brutal choices, and when humanity was not a single species, but a landscape of cousins vying for dominance. The suggestion that Homo sapiens may have hunted Neanderthals is not simply speculative. It is rooted in direct physical evidence unearthed from cave sites across Europe, such as the Goyet caves in Belgium, where Neanderthal bones dating back over 40,000 years have been found with clear signs of anthropogenic modification. These bones bear cut marks that match those made when butchering animals for meat. The cuts are typically found around joints, indicating deliberate disarticulation. Some bones also show signs of percussion where they were struck with stone tools to break them open and access the nutrient-rich marrow inside. These are not the marks of accidental damage or postmortem weathering. They reflect a methodical, practiced technique, one that suggests Neanderthals were treated as prey, at least in certain circumstances. There is also evidence that Neanderthals themselves engaged in cannibalism, particularly under conditions of nutritional stress. However, what sets the Homo sapiens, Neanderthal interaction apart is the timing and context. As modern humans migrated into Europe from Africa around 45,000 to 50,000 years ago, they entered territories already occupied by Neanderthals. For a few millennia, the two species coexisted, but this was not peaceful coexistence in any modern sense. It was a struggle for resources, territory, and possibly even cultural dominance. In that struggle, Homo sapiens may have seen Neanderthals not just as competitors, but as threats or even as a food source. The notion of humans hunting other hominins is disturbing, but not unprecedented. In conditions of extreme scarcity, humans have turned to cannibalism throughout history in shipwrecks, sieges, and famines. In a prehistoric world shaped by Ice Age climates, with limited edible flora and dangerous megafauna, the temptation to prey upon another hominin group may have outweighed any taboo. Importantly, cannibalism of Neanderthals by Homo sapiens doesn't necessarily imply moral depravity or sadism. It may simply reflect a desperate calculation made in a brutal world: kill or be killed, eat or starve. But it is the targeting of another intelligent, tool-using, and socially complex species that gives this theory such weight and discomfort. Tool marks found on Neanderthal bones in sites like Moula-Guercy in France and El Sidrón in Spain mirror the butchery patterns found on animal remains from the same sites. These include evidence of skinning, defleshing, and even cooking, as indicated by thermal alteration on bones. In some cases, skulls appear to have been intentionally broken in ways that allowed for brain extraction, a process seen in animal butchery for caloric gains. This level of anatomical knowledge, combined with the selection of nutrient-dense body parts, further supports the idea that these were not acts of random violence, but calculated decisions to obtain sustenance. Another factor supporting the theory of Neanderthal hunting is the demographic and environmental context in which these events occurred. As modern humans expanded through Eurasia, they likely had larger social groups, more advanced projectile weapons, and broader social networks than the Neanderthals. These advantages could have made them more effective hunters and more dangerous enemies. Neanderthals, while highly intelligent and adapted to cold climates, may have been less able to adapt to rapid environmental changes or to the pressure of competition from Homo sapiens. As game animals became scarcer during colder periods, and as two intelligent predators overlapped in range, conflict would have been almost inevitable. Genetic evidence also provides indirect support. Studies of ancient DNA reveal that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred, leaving traces of Neanderthal ancestry in all non-African modern populations. This interbreeding suggests that contact between the two species was not purely hostile, but the low levels of shared DNA, generally only 1% to 4%, indicate that such interactions were rare or limited in duration. If humans and Neanderthals had frequent peaceful relations, we would expect more genetic mixing. The limited admixture, combined with fossil evidence of Neanderthal decline shortly after human arrival, supports the theory that Homo sapiens may have actively displaced, overwhelmed, and sometimes killed Neanderthal groups. Moreover, in some of the sites where evidence of Neanderthal butchering has been found, there are also signs of symbolic behavior, possibly pointing to a dual motive for cannibalism. In some prehistoric societies, consuming the flesh of an enemy was not just about food, but about domination or ritual. Eating the body of a defeated rival could be seen as a way to absorb their strength, gain spiritual power, or assert dominance. Whether Homo sapiens held such beliefs at the time is uncertain, but the archaeological record shows that they were already capable of complex symbolic thought, as evidenced by cave paintings, carved figurines, and burial practices. It's possible that these practices extended into their interactions with Neanderthals. The hunting and cannibalism of Neanderthals by early humans, if indeed it happened as the evidence suggests, would not have been a uniform practice across all regions and groups. It likely occurred sporadically, driven by local conditions, environmental stress, and cultural choices. Some human bands may have traded or coexisted peacefully with Neanderthal neighbors, while others may have viewed them as prey. But the existence of even isolated cases points to a brutal reality. that Homo sapiens had the capacity to treat another human species not just as a rival, but as a resource to be consumed. The discovery of cut marks on Neanderthal bones has provided researchers with some of the most compelling evidence that early humans engaged in acts of cannibalism and potentially hunted their hominin cousins. These marks, often subtle and requiring microscopic analysis to fully identify, are not random or caused by natural erosion or scavenger activity. They bear the hallmarks of intentional butchering techniques, precise incisions around joints, repetitive slicing where muscles attach to bones, and fractures aimed at exposing internal tissues like marrow. These findings suggest not only that Neanderthals were cut and processed for consumption, but that those who did the cutting had a clear understanding of anatomy and technique, much like they would have applied to large prey animals. In several archaeological sites across Europe, including Goyet in Belgium and Moula-Guercy in France, Neanderthal remains have been found that exhibit cut marks nearly identical to those found on contemporary animal bones from the same layers. This includes strategic cuts used to skin the body, detach muscles, and extract fat and bone marrow. Some bones also show signs of being smashed open, a deliberate method used by ancient humans to access nutrient-rich marrow hidden within. These are not accidental injuries or post-mortem environmental damage. They follow a pattern, a signature that suggests a specific purpose, food preparation. When compared to butchery patterns on animals such as deer, mammoths, or horses, the similarity is striking. The locations of the marks, the angles, and the tools used all suggest the same techniques applied across species, including Neanderthals. In some cases, the bones were even found with evidence of burning, further supporting the idea that they were roasted or cooked. Fire residue, char marks, and cracked thermal fractures in bones indicate exposure to high heat, which was likely used to make tough tissue more edible or to remove hair and skin before consumption. This systematic processing of Neanderthal corpses reflects a knowledge base that was not unique to any one species, but one that early modern humans certainly possessed and applied. The anatomical focus of the marks also reveals something about the motivations behind these acts. Cuts around the ribs, limbs, and base of the skull are consistent with dismemberment and tissue extraction. In particular, the fracturing of long bones such as femurs and humeri indicates a focused effort to reach marrow, a highly caloric food source prized by hunter-gatherer societies. Marrow provided fat in diets that were often heavy on protein but low in lipids, especially in cold climates. Thus, breaking open bones for marrow was an efficient and necessary process, even if the bones belonged to other hominins. This is not simply evidence of violence, it is evidence of nutritional strategy. Cut marks also appear in some of the most contextually rich archaeological sites, where both Neanderthal and animal bones show identical treatment. At the Sidrón Cave site in Spain, for example, at least 12 Neanderthal individuals, adults, adolescents, and even children were found with bones showing cut marks and fractures. These were not casual deaths or isolated injuries. The scene indicates a systematic process of defleshing and consumption. The Neanderthal bones were discarded in a similar manner to animal remains, further suggesting that the individuals involved did not distinguish between species when it came to processing bodies for food. Some critics have suggested that these marks could have been made by Neanderthals themselves, processing the remains of their own dead. While this is possible in some cases, several details challenge that interpretation. First, in sites where early modern human artifacts and tools are found alongside butchered Neanderthal remains, the cultural association leans toward Homo sapiens as the likely agents. Second, certain advanced stone tool technologies found in those contexts are more consistent with anatomically modern human techniques. Finally, the pattern of interspecies violence fits into a broader narrative of competition, displacement, and possibly predation between Neanderthals and incoming Homo sapiens. The tools used to make these cuts were sharp flint blades and scrapers, the same types of tools used for animal butchery and hide preparation. Under microscopic analysis, the edges of the cuts show striations that match experimental replicas made by archaeologists who butcher animal carcasses using Stone Age methods. These tools were held with precision and used effectively, not in anger or chaotic frenzy, but with practiced intent. That level of control points to a learned behavior, not an impulsive act of desperation, but a potentially common practice in specific situations. Another important clue is the positioning and condition of the bones. In many cases, the remains were not laid to rest or buried. They were found scattered, fragmented, and intermingled with animal bones and broken tools. This lack of ritual or burial suggests that the individuals involved were not being honored or mourned. They were being utilized, dismantled, and likely consumed. The absence of formal burial contrasts sharply with other Neanderthal sites where burials have been identified, indicating that when Neanderthals buried their own, there was care and intention. The presence of cut marks disrupts this context, indicating an entirely different motivation and behavior set. Additionally, the distribution of cut marks tells researchers about the sequence in which body parts were processed. Cuts near the mandible and base of the skull show where heads were removed or opened to access the brain, another highly nutritious organ. Marks around the pelvic girdle and femurs indicate dismemberment of the lower body and separation of the limbs for easier handling or transport. This sequencing is consistent with prey processing, further reinforcing the interpretation that Neanderthals were not just killed, they were reduced to resources, dissected with the same logic used for animals. The implications of these findings extend beyond basic anthropological interest. They touch on the complexity of early human behavior, cognition, and morality. The people making these cuts were intelligent, social beings capable of symbolic thought, art, and community. Yet in certain moments, they turned those same capabilities toward acts of calculated violence, possibly even against their own genetic relatives. The cut marks on Neanderthal bones are not simply scars, they are records of choices, reflections of adaptation, and evidence of the harsh realities of prehistoric survival. Each mark represents a moment in time when survival took precedence over compassion, when another hominin body became a means to an end. The systematic nature of those marks, their placement, precision, and repetition argue strongly against coincidence or anomaly. They suggest a repeated behavior, one learned, taught, and perhaps even accepted within a group. The evidence doesn't merely hint at consumption, it describes it in forensic detail, bone by bone, cut by cut. Cannibalism among early humans and their relatives has long been a subject of controversy, but evidence suggests that it was not always the result of simple hunger. In the case of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, cannibalism may have been driven by a range of motives: survival during times of scarcity, the spoils of warfare, or even symbolic rituals with cultural or spiritual meaning. These possibilities reflect the complexity of human behavior in the Paleolithic era, where physical need, social structure, and belief systems often intersected in ways that shaped daily life and critical decisions. Cannibalism was not always about nutrition alone. It may also have been a means of asserting dominance, preserving group identity, or coping with existential threats in a harsh world. Survival cannibalism is one of the most straightforward explanations. During glacial periods, when resources were limited and game was difficult to track or hunt, early humans would have faced long stretches without adequate food. In these extreme conditions, cannibalism could have become a pragmatic decision rather than a moral dilemma. Archaeological findings from Neanderthal sites such as Goyet in Belgium and El Sidrón in Spain support this idea. There, Neanderthal remains exhibit cut marks and fractures consistent with deliberate defleshing and marrow extraction, suggesting that individuals were processed for consumption in the same manner as animals. These signs appear alongside evidence of environmental stress, including shifts in flora and fauna populations and reduced biodiversity, which would have constrained food availability. In such moments, cannibalism was likely a desperate yet calculated response to starvation. However, survival is not the only plausible explanation. Warfare between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens may have also played a significant role. As modern humans migrated into Europe and began to expand across territories already occupied by Neanderthals, competition for resources became inevitable. The overlap in habitation sites, hunting ranges, and water sources would have led to increased encounters between the two groups. Conflict was likely, and in some cases, deadly. In these confrontations, victorious groups may have treated the bodies of the fallen not merely as enemies, but as opportunities for sustenance or symbols of conquest. Cannibalism in this context would not be just about feeding a hungry band of foragers. It would be an act of triumph, a brutal assertion of superiority over a rival species. Consuming the flesh of an enemy, especially one as physically and intellectually similar as Neanderthals, may also have had deeper cultural or symbolic significance. In many historical and tribal societies, cannibalism carried ritualistic meanings. It could symbolize the transfer of strength, bravery, or spirit from the consumed to the consumer. In a prehistoric world without written language but rich in oral tradition, such acts may have reinforced group cohesion, served as rites of passage, or been performed to invoke protection or success in future battles. Early modern humans, who demonstrated symbolic behaviors such as cave painting, body ornamentation, and ceremonial burials, likely held beliefs that went beyond the practical. Cannibalism, in this context, may have been part of a larger world, view in which the boundaries between the material and spiritual were fluid, and the consumption of another being had layered meanings. There is also the possibility that cannibalism served a social function within early human communities, unrelated to warfare or immediate hunger. Intragroup cannibalism, when members of the same community consumed their dead, has been documented among Neanderthals themselves, particularly during periods of famine. It could have been seen as a way to honor the dead, to keep them within the community, or to prevent waste in times of dire need. Alternatively, it might have served as punishment or warning, a way to enforce norms by turning social outcasts or captives into examples. Among Homo sapiens, the decision to consume a Neanderthal body might have symbolized a rejection of the other, a statement that they are not us. Even though, biologically, the two species were incredibly close. What makes the idea of ritual cannibalism especially compelling is that it reflects the psychological and symbolic capacities of early humans. Unlike simple predation, ritual behavior involves planning, repetition, and meaning-making. The placement of remains, the types of bones chosen for processing, and even the context of their discovery, sometimes in caves with signs of ritual use, suggest that these acts were more than chaotic or random. At sites such as Moula-Guercy in France, cut marks on Neanderthal bones indicate they were skinned and butchered with precision. The bones were not simply discarded in piles, but arranged in patterns that may have held significance for those who performed the acts. These behaviors echo later human practices, where ritual and death were intimately connected. Psychologically, symbolic cannibalism may also have functioned as a way to process fear and anxiety. Neanderthals were not simply other animals. They were highly intelligent, social beings capable of speech, like communication, fire use, tool-making, and possibly even abstract thought. To early Homo sapiens, they may have seemed like distorted reflections of themselves, familiar yet foreign. This uncanny similarity may have provoked a unique mix of emotions: fear, hatred, fascination, and even reverence. By killing and consuming Neanderthals, early humans could have been enacting a form of psychological dominance, suppressing that ambiguity and claiming uncontested control of the landscape and the symbolic order. The theory of cannibalism as symbolic ritual is further supported by ethnographic comparisons. In various indigenous cultures across the world, cannibalism has been observed as part of funerary practices, warfare customs, or religious ceremonies. While these practices differ in form and meaning, they consistently demonstrate one thing: The consumption of human flesh is rarely just about physical need. It is imbued with layers of belief, identity, and power. Applying this perspective to prehistoric behavior allows researchers to consider cannibalism not as a sign of savagery, but as a meaningful cultural act that reflected how early humans understood the world around them and their place within it. The multiplicity of reasons for cannibalism, survival, warfare, ritual also suggests that these motives were not mutually exclusive. In fact, they may have overlapped depending on the situation. A Neanderthal killed during a territorial conflict might have first served as a warning to others, then as a source of food, and finally as a ritual symbol of group victory or unity. The decision to engage in cannibalism would have depended on context, including environmental conditions, social pressures, spiritual beliefs, and immediate needs. This flexible and situational approach to behavior is a hallmark of Homo sapiens and may have contributed to the species' ultimate success and adaptability. Understanding why early humans may have cannibalized Neanderthals challenges us to think more deeply about our ancestors, not as mindless brutes, but as complex beings navigating a world of uncertainty, danger, and deep social meaning. Cannibalism, viewed through this lens, becomes more than an act of desperation or cruelty. It becomes a window into the survival strategies, social dynamics, and symbolic lives of our earliest predecessors, revealing just how intricate and varied human behavior has been since our very beginnings. The discovery that modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA has fundamentally changed the way we understand the relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. For centuries, Neanderthals were portrayed as brutish, primitive, and separate from the lineage that led to us. They were thought to be an evolutionary dead end, a side branch that failed to survive the challenges of the Ice Age, while Homo sapiens rose to global dominance. But genetic evidence has upended that simplistic narrative. Instead of being entirely separate, we now know that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred, and that their genetic legacy still lives on in nearly every person of non-African descent. This revelation speaks not only to shared ancestry, but to the complexity of prehistoric interactions between two intelligent, resourceful human species. The sequencing of the Neanderthal genome in 2010 was a turning point. Scientists compared ancient Neanderthal DNA extracted from fossilized bones with that of modern humans, and discovered a surprising truth. People of European, Asian, and indigenous American descent share between 1 and 4% of their DNA with Neanderthals. This indicated that at some point in history, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals met, lived together, and reproduced. These encounters are estimated to have occurred around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, likely in the Middle East, when modern humans migrating out of Africa first crossed paths with Neanderthal populations already established in Eurasia. The presence of Neanderthal DNA in modern genomes is not uniform. It varies across individuals and populations, and some regions of the human genome contain more Neanderthal influence than others. Intriguingly, the genes we inherited from Neanderthals are not random. They tend to cluster in regions associated with skin pigmentation, immune response, and metabolism. For instance, genes affecting keratin production, important for skin and hair, may have helped Homo sapiens adapt to colder, non-African climates more efficiently. Likewise, Neanderthal variants in immune system genes may have provided early Homo sapiens with defenses against Eurasian pathogens they had never encountered before. These inherited traits likely offered survival advantages to our ancestors, aiding their adaptation to new environments and harsh conditions. At the same time, there is evidence that certain Neanderthal genes were deleterious and have been gradually purged from modern human genomes over time. In particular, some Neanderthal-derived regions are associated with increased risk for conditions such as type 2 diabetes, depression, nicotine addiction, and autoimmune disorders. This complex legacy shows that the genetic exchange between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was a mixed inheritance, offering both benefits and vulnerabilities. Evolutionary pressures have likely worked to retain helpful traits while minimizing those that are harmful. The dynamic interaction between ancient and modern DNA continues to influence human health and development today, long after the Neanderthals themselves disappeared. What makes the presence of Neanderthal DNA even more significant is how it complicates our understanding of what it means to be modern. It reveals that our evolutionary path was not a straight line, but a mosaic of interactions, exchanges, and shared histories. The notion of a single pure human lineage is biologically inaccurate. Instead, Homo sapiens absorbed and integrated genetic material from other hominin species, making our species more resilient and genetically diverse. In this way, Neanderthals did not simply vanish, they became part of us. Interbreeding also suggests that the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was not limited to conflict or competition. While there is evidence of violence and possibly even cannibalism between the two groups, the existence of hybrid children tells a more nuanced story. These unions may have been rare or occurred under difficult circumstances, but they demonstrate that the two species were biologically compatible and capable of forming social bonds at least occasionally. Some geneticists have speculated that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens may have had similar mating behaviors and social structures, which facilitated these interactions. The resulting offspring would have possessed a blend of genetic traits, passing on parts of both lineages into the future. Further research has even revealed that some regions of the human genome are devoid of Neanderthal DNA, suggesting that certain areas were incompatible with hybrid survival or reproduction. This indicates that while interbreeding occurred, there were biological limits to the integration. Some hybrid individuals may have been less fertile or faced developmental challenges, and natural selection likely played a role in shaping which Neanderthal genes persisted in human populations. This complex genetic legacy reflects a delicate balance between divergence and unity, similarity and difference. The implications of Neanderthal DNA go beyond genetics. They reshape how we think about identity, ancestry, and what it means to be human. The idea that we are the sole survivors of a diverse human family is no longer accurate. Instead, we are the inheritors of multiple lineages, including those of Neanderthals and, in some cases, Denisovans, a sister group of Neanderthals who also contributed genes to certain populations in Asia and Oceania. The image of a solitary Homo sapiens emerging from Africa and replacing all other humans through sheer superiority has given way to a more intricate narrative of encounter, exchange, and hybridization. The genetic legacy of Neanderthals has also sparked new conversations in anthropology, archaeology, and evolutionary biology. It challenges long-held assumptions about Neanderthal intelligence, culture, and capacity for symbolic thought. If they were capable of forming relationships with Homo sapiens, raising mixed children, and passing on useful genetic traits, then they were not inferior versions of us. They were in many respects equals, different in form and perhaps in culture, but fundamentally human in their cognitive abilities and emotional range. Discoveries of Neanderthal art, burial practices, and tool-making sophistication continue to reinforce this perspective. The fact that their DNA lives on in us is not just a genetic fact. It is a testament to their place in our story. Far from being forgotten, they remain a part of our very biology, woven into the code that shapes our bodies, our immune systems, and even some aspects of our behavior. This continuity across time underscores the deep connections that link all human species, even those long extinct. The presence of Neanderthal DNA also reminds us that human evolution was not a process of simple replacement, but of integration and adaptation. It emphasizes the porous boundaries between species and the capacity for genetic exchange across evolutionary divides. The Neanderthals may have disappeared as a distinct population, but their genetic echoes continue to influence who we are today. They walked the same paths, faced similar struggles, and left behind more than just bones and tools. They left pieces of themselves in us. The extinction of Neanderthals remains one of the most debated and intriguing events in human history, and it reflects not only the brutal aspects of human evolution, but also the deep complexity of how multiple human species interacted, adapted, and eventually disappeared. Neanderthals lived across vast regions of Europe and Western Asia for over 300 years, surviving harsh climates, ice age fluctuations, and megafaunal extinctions. They were not a primitive or inferior species, as once widely assumed, but intelligent, resourceful, and capable of behaviors that suggest language, symbolic thought, and cultural development. Yet despite all this, they vanished around 40,000 years ago, shortly after the arrival of anatomically modern humans in their territories. The reasons behind their disappearance are likely multifaceted, involving both environmental pressures and, crucially, the arrival and expansion of Homo sapiens. The timing of Neanderthal extinction and the spread of Homo sapiens across Europe is more than a coincidence. Archaeological evidence shows that as Homo sapiens moved into Europe from the Near East, Neanderthal populations began to decline and fragment. Their cultural traditions, as seen through their tools and habitation sites, became less complex or were replaced altogether. Within a few thousand years, Homo sapiens had spread across the continent, while Neanderthals had vanished from the archaeological record. This rapid replacement raises critical questions about the nature of interaction between the two species, and whether Homo sapiens played a direct role in Neanderthal extinction, or whether the arrival of a new competitor simply accelerated already existing pressures. Brutality in this context does not necessarily refer to acts of violence alone, though evidence of conflict may exist. It encompasses a wider set of factors including ecological competition, resource displacement, and the spread of diseases. Modern humans may have brought with them pathogens to which Neanderthals had no immunity, causing devastating outbreaks that weakened already isolated groups. Competition for food sources, especially in resource-scarce Ice Age environments, would have put both species in direct conflict. Homo sapiens, with their more flexible social structures, broader dietary adaptability, and advanced tools, may have had an evolutionary edge. This advantage would not have required outright violence to be lethal. It could manifest through more efficient hunting, faster population growth, and wider territorial spread. However, this extinction is not solely about domination. It also reflects the deep complexity of evolutionary processes, where multiple variables interact over long periods to shape survival outcomes. Neanderthals were not doomed simply because Homo sapiens were stronger or smarter. In fact, there is increasing evidence that they possessed cognitive and emotional capacities very similar to our own. They made sophisticated tools, used fire, constructed shelters, wore clothing, and likely engaged in symbolic activities such as burying their dead and possibly creating art. Genetic studies also reveal that their brains may have been wired differently, not less intelligently, but in ways that were adapted to their environment and social structure. Their extinction was not a simple case of inferiority, but a convergence of circumstances that tipped the balance toward Homo sapiens. Modern humans may have had certain key advantages that proved decisive in the long run. Their social networks were larger and more dynamic, allowing for faster exchange of knowledge and resources. They likely had more varied diets, including a greater reliance on fish and plant foods, which would have been critical in times of game scarcity. Their tools evolved more rapidly and became more specialized, showing an ability to innovate and adapt more quickly to environmental challenges. Language, if more complex among Homo sapiens, may have facilitated cooperation, planning, and cultural transmission on a scale that Neanderthals could not match. These differences, subtle in the short term, could have led to significant disparities over generations, contributing to the slow decline and eventual disappearance of Neanderthal populations. Despite this decline, Neanderthals did not vanish entirely without a trace. Fact that modern non-African humans carry Neanderthal DNA indicates that at least some interbreeding occurred before the final extinction. These genetic remnants suggest that the relationship between the two species was not purely adversarial. There were moments of connection, of shared life, and of biological integration. The extinction, then, is not the complete erasure of a species but a transformation, one in which parts of Neanderthals live on within the modern human genome. This blending complicates the idea of evolutionary success as a zero-sum game and invites a more nuanced understanding of what it means for a species to disappear. In this light, the extinction of Neanderthals becomes a mirror in which we can examine our own nature. The ability of Homo sapiens to outcompete, outlast, and outnumber others reflects both our adaptability and our potential for displacement. It raises ethical and philosophical questions about how we treat those who are different from us, even when those differences are small. If our ancestors could turn against their closest relatives, beings who thought, felt, and lived not so differently from themselves, it suggests a duality in the human condition. We are capable of immense creativity, cooperation, and compassion, but also of exclusion, exploitation, and destruction when faced with perceived threats or competition. The disappearance of Neanderthals also challenges the simplicity of linear evolutionary models. It forces scientists and historians to consider alternative paths. What if Neanderthals had survived? What if both species had coexisted indefinitely, sharing knowledge, culture, and technology? The reality that they did not, and that we are here largely in their place, gives their story a tragic dimension. Their extinction was not just the end of a species. It was the loss of an entire branch of the human experience, with its own perspectives, traditions, and possibilities. The remnants of Neanderthal life, preserved in caves, bones, and our own DNA, hint at what once was and what might have been. The interplay of brutality and complexity in Neanderthal extinction continues to shape how we view our place in the natural world. It reminds us that survival is not always about being the strongest or the smartest, but about adapting to change, forging alliances, and sometimes displacing those who came before. The story of the Neanderthals is not just a prehistoric mystery. It is a reflection of the forces that have shaped humanity across millennia. Their extinction, seen through this lens, becomes not a singular event but a chapter in the ongoing saga of human evolution, a chapter filled with conflict, cooperation, interbreeding, innovation, and the inexorable pressures of survival in a challenging world.